Well, one thing that's sometimes a real amazing thing is treating sleep apnea. We've seen people who have undiagnosed sleep apnea, they get diagnosed, they get on CPAP, and 2 or 3 weeks later, their spouse is calling us saying, "Oh my gosh, he is back."
You have found your way to the Lemanne Gordon podcast, where docs talk shop. Happy eavesdropping.
I'm Dr. Dawn Lemanne. I treat cancer patients.
I'm Dr. Deborah Gordon. I work with aging patients.
We've been in practice a long time.
A very long time.
We learn so much talking to each other.
We do. What if we let people listen in? In today's episode, we have the pleasure of a chat with my longtime friend and colleague, Dr. Anne Hathaway. Dr. Hathaway enlightens us on some of the details of her work with Dr. Dale Bredesen, delving into some aspects of the treatment for mold toxicity and hormone replacement therapy for older women. Dr. Lemanne also has a chance to share some insightful details about her innovative work with hormone pulsing as potential treatment for some hormone-sensitive cancers. Join us as we explore these exciting topics and more. So it's my pleasure today to welcome to our podcast our guest, Dr. Anne Hathaway, and she's well known among functional medicine doctors for her clinical achievements. But before I review a few highlights, I just have to celebrate our own friendship because I hope you're all sitting down. We have been friends for 50 years. We became fast friends our first year of medical school, and since then we've hiked and windsurfed. We spent family time together, as well as our time in medicine. And I treasure her friendship and blew my mind when I realized it's been 50 years. So over the years since then, our paths have diverged in our practice of medicine. But we came together again, in my mind, in 2016, when we both enrolled at Dr. Bredesen's first conference at the Buck Institute, presenting the details of his proposal, his protocol. He was going over the background and features of the protocol he was developing with some contributions by key speakers, including, and I believe this was a spur-of-the-moment request on his part. I don't think you had heads-up warning to this, Anne, when he asked Anne to present information on hormone replacement therapy to this full auditorium at Buck Institute. Is that right? It was sort of last minute?
What happened is in the break, he had mentioned in his opening remarks that estradiol was very important for the female brain. And I was really happy to hear him express that. And so I said to him, Dale, I have collected a bibliography on estradiol and progesterone over many, many years. And I would be happy to share that bibliography with you. He said, well, how about if you present to the audience today? I mean, literally, so trusting that I wasn't a nut job.
I thought you had overnight to prepare, but evidently you just had the lunch hour. Okay. Well,
I had no time to prepare.
You knocked it out of the park. And she's still in our cohort of colleagues. She's still our go-to person about safety, protocol, keeping track of current research, and we're going to talk about some of that today. But where we've really dovetailed since, and I think we started working together in 2018, Anne was a key organizer and protocol designer on Dr. Bredesen's first clinical trial. She worked on the design features and was one of the clinicians and authors. And as you know, I've told all of you about it before. I was honored and delighted to be part of that trial. For those of you who haven't heard me spiel about it, it was a 9-month trial, and 22 of our 25 patients showed marked improvement in their Alzheimer's disease over just 9 months. The last little bio bit I'll put in is that she's still a clinician in his current trial, scheduled to be completed this fall, and we'll see what she can tell us about the progress of that trial. Anything important about your history or current activities that you'd like to share that I missed in that?
No, it's so interesting to hear you describe it. It's very nice, Deborah. Thank you.
So after that little background about your work with Dale Bredesen and the protocol, I'd like to hear from you what you're most excited about from our one completed trial and the current trial that's in progress.
Well, the one completed trial was, exciting and fascinating to work on. I was amazed that 8 out of my 10 patients had marked improvement in their cognition.
So let me just,
It's
I'm going to interrupt there just for our audience. My understanding of this trial was to see if you could affect the timeline, the expected timeline of decline, the expected decline in patients with dementia. Could you just give a very brief outline of what this trial was and what it was looking at?
so, there are many studies where they show a slowing of decline, not ours. Ours showed an absolute improvement in cognition on various basic tests, a MoCA and another more complex test called the CNS vital signs test.
And this was something that had never been done before. Is that correct? Most, as you pointed out, people
As far
were
as we
looking.
know, this has not been done, that you take a patient where they are, you put them on a specific protocol, which I could go through in detail,
An
but
excruciating detail.
it's a lot, right? We put them on this protocol. We follow them very closely, these research patients.
And these were not necessarily drug-based protocols, although I think they included some drugs, but they were trying to affect the imbalances and deficiencies in metabolic processes, right? With vitamins, lifestyle, sleep, exercise, ketosis, fasting, those kinds of things.
Yes, you got it. You got it very correct there. Yeah. Everybody followed a plant-based, mildly ketogenic diet. We like their ketones to be at between 1 and 2. We optimized their sleep. We really pushed hard for everybody to get over 7 hours of sleep, 7.5 if they can. We had them do stress reduction training. We used the protocol HeartMath, which is a interacts with the vagal system. And everybody had to do Brain HQ. We're finding Brain HQ is a brain training system that's set up for, it's a little bit like playing games, but the games are not always fun to do. People complain about them.
It's work.
I
It's
do
work.
Brain HQ.
Work. Huh?
I do Brain HQ, and I find it frustrating sometimes, but it's scientifically designed to grow new synapses, and it's clear to me that it does that from both my own interaction with it and my patients.
But what you
interaction
say,
with
Dawn,
it.
is true, is that it is work. And we, in fact, coached people that this is your job, that you have, picked a certain amount of time depending on the patient, but mostly it was about 30 minutes a day, 5 to 7 days a week. And we said, this is your job. It is work. You have to do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then exercise, of course, is a very, very important part of it. Both, moderate aerobic exercise, preferably at least 6 days a week, 30 minutes, high intensity intervals, 3 times a week, 15 to 20 minutes. We could go into what all these things are. Strength training, absolutely extremely important.
So there were a lot of things, and that's an
This isn't
unusual
even
part
the
of it.
half of it.
That's an unusual type of trial. But
Yeah,
tell
absolutely.
us why you chose to put so many things in this trial. I think that's really interesting.
Because it works.
Okay,
That's the reason.
yeah.
Because we really knew, honestly, Dale Bredesen really knew. Dale Bredesen developed this protocol after 30 years of bench research, right? Understanding what's going wrong in the brain when you develop Alzheimer's and also other neurological diseases. I mean, he understands much more than your average neurologist about Lewy body, about Parkinson's, about frontotemporal dementia, et cetera, right? Vascular dementia. So his wife, Dale Bredesen's wife, Aida Bredesen, is a functional medicine doctor, long-standing, very, very highly involved in functional medicine. And what happened is Dale, with his bench research, came together with Aida Bredesen, and they talked and talked over several years and had many, many aha moments in that process, and were able to put together this protocol. Now, these things that I've just mentioned to you, that's just the beginning. That's what everyone does. But after that, then you have to look at each person individually based on lots and lots of testing, okay? You have to treat insulin resistance. You have to support their mitochondria. You have to address any HPA axis problems. You have to support their sex hormones. That's a pet area of mine. Thyroid has to be optimized. Omega-3 and other fatty acids have to be optimized. Micro and macronutrient support. You have to look for oxidative stress and address it, both the vascular type of stress or other kinds of oxidative stress. You have to treat atherosclerosis if it's there, microvascular disease.
This is so amazing. And one of the things that that strikes me about this is that if I'm right, correct. If I'm wrong, correct me. But one of the things that Dale Bredesen's research has been criticized for is for not isolating one element and comparing that to a control element, and then looking at the differences between those two. Instead, he's doing the exact opposite. He's taking a whole lot of things and dumping them in. And then not only that, then he's treating each patient as an N of one and fixing each patient's particular endocrine and metabolic issue. And then putting that back together again. This sounds, from a certain point of view, absolutely nuts. But when you think about it, it sounds like it's absolutely the medicine of the future, where we actually look at real life inputs. Everybody has a different diet. Everybody has different needs, but there are some, overarching things that are needed. And there's a whole lot of things that need to come together. There's synergy between these various inputs. So
Yes,
talk a little bit about that.
right.
How you deal with how you and Dale Bredesen have dealt with, and you, Deborah, this kind of criticism, and what your thoughts are about it. I think it's magnificent. You're developing new designs and new research designs, which is fantastic. Now we have to catch up with the mathematics and the statistics, but I think you're way ahead of the rest of us.
The results, I think, speak for themselves. The point is that you have to address each person individually. Each person has different inputs, different reasons why they have cognitive decline. You have to look at the gut. You have to look at the oral microbiome. You have to look at autoimmunity. You have to look at immune deficiencies. You have to look at chemical toxins, metals, heavy metals, and mycotoxins, and Lyme and other tick-borne infections, and treat those. All of that has to be treated to fix the brain, And most people, almost no one is going to have all of those things, but you have to look carefully, and then you have to fix.
And then you have to look again later. For those of you anyone who's maybe not that familiar with Dale Bredesen's work, there's a wonderful TV program. I guess it's a documentary of his work. And what's the name of it, Anne? It's got
Memories for Life.
Memories for Life. I was thinking of Chasing Memories, but Memories for Life. And in it, there's somebody who does really well with the protocol. And she's sort of like riding a high kite and doing great. And suddenly she starts declining, even though she's doing everything right. So she has to be put back through that evaluation process to figure out which of the links in the chain has broken with what's for somebody for whom it was very successful for a number of years. And they found mold toxicity, and she got better. And it is a commitment for the patient and the physician for a lot of attention in the moment, and a lot, and treating Jane differently than George, and then staying on that. We have to keep seeing the patient for years in the future doing a similar amount of re-examining.
Yeah, if things aren't going well, then you start back into the complex of testing, right? Yep.
What are some really unexpected results that you saw, and in your work with your patients in this trial? Was there anything that surprised you?
Well, one thing that's sometimes a real amazing thing is treating sleep apnea. We've seen people who have undiagnosed sleep apnea, they get diagnosed, they get on CPAP, and 2 or 3 weeks later, their spouse is calling us saying, "Oh my gosh, he is back. He is so much better." So every once in a while, you have that magic thing that happens. And taking someone out of mold, someone who's living in a very moldy environment, you get them out of there into a safe environment. And someone who's aphasic, someone who's not speaking at all of a sudden they start speaking. I've seen that happen. So those are some really very fulfilling moments as far as working with this protocol when those kind of things happen. So even though we go through this huge list, and we have to go through this huge list and make sure we're addressing everything, sometimes there are these, absolutely transformative things that can happen over a matter of weeks.
Mm-hmm. And I would say I've definitely seen that with mold. I remember the first patient who came to me suspected mold, and I thought, oh, I don't want to learn about mold. I'm going to I can't refer it. There's nobody to refer her to.
Exactly.
and I treated her, and her husband came back in a month or so and said, I found all the mold and I've cleaned it out of the house. Oh my God, there was so much of it. And I said, great, she should come back in a couple of weeks and see me again. And she never came back for follow-up. And I reached out to her. She says, I'm so busy. I'm back at work full time. I don't have time to come see you, And she was nonverbal when she came in with her husband. And she did go through a mold protocol, but it was really getting the mold out of her house, which, something people ask about is, we're all living in the house. Why is she suffering? And we initially addressed that by looking at particular gene configurations. But I've just come to the point where saying, we don't completely know why it affects some people more than others, but the estimate is about a quarter of people are highly sensitive, and the other 3 members of her family, she only had one other, but she could have had 3 other members of her family. Only about a quarter of people are consistently seriously affected by mold. That's the statistic I think of, and I've even made up a 4 people walk into a moldy bar joke about it. But
let's hear it.
4 people walk into a moldy bar. And one person says, oh, this bar is too moldy. I am so allergic. I'm going to sneeze and ruin the whole evening. So that person leaves. And 3 people are left. So you're still, 3 out of 4 are there. And they all do fine over the evening. And they all inhale mold, and they all have mold living in their bodies. But 2 of the people, their mold starts to reproduce in their body, and their immune system just overwhelms it and gets rid of it. But that other person starts going downhill maybe in a couple months, depending on how many times they've been exposed to mold, maybe not for a year. And then they recall, oh yeah, I was in that moldy bar weekly for a couple months. But it's only one person who walks into that moldy bar out of the 4 that's right. The laugh is in the first line. Okay, I get it. It's not a funny joke at the end. But the laugh is in the first line, and it gets people's attention. But it's about a quarter of people who really respond badly, and the rest of us, knock on wood that we're all in the 3 out of 4 category, can tolerate a fair amount of mold and maybe get allergic or a stuffy nose, but our body takes care of it.
Yeah, I had a Lewy body patient who was, sundowning really badly. And I told his wife, you need to check the house for mold. We'd look for lots and lots of different things. Turned out their whole HVAC system was infected with rodents. Rodents had gotten in there. So there's all this rodent detritus and thick mold growing in their HVAC. They had the entire thing removed, put in a new one, and he was amazingly better a week after that HVAC system was replaced.
Right. 2 patients of mine, a couple, work in the same place, And she set out the little petri dishes and discovered the mold coming out of their work HVAC. She set out the little petri dishes and discovered the mold coming out of their work HVAC. And she miraculously got the whole city to invest in this city building and treated all the HVAC systems, which were infested with mold from rodent drippings. And they were really glad that the city was grateful to her. And she's fine. She's got back the zest that she had before we treated her with mold, but her partner, her guy, still has it in his body, I think, because he's not responded to now being in a mold-free environment. And that's a tip, that you're one of the people that can't respond, that can't take care of the mold yourself, when even after you're out of the moldy environment, if you're not also... I think all the people that you and I were talking about did better out of the mold because we were also treating them for the mold.
So what is treatment for mold that's living in your body? How do you test for it? If you're looking for that, what do you test for, and if you find it, what do you treat with?
We use urine mycotoxin testing, and you treat them with binders. So there's a long list of possible binders. People like various ones. I like activated charcoal. That's one of my favorite ones. I don't tend to use the more intensive ones like Call and those kinds of things. I like to use the supplements. And you need to put people on them generally for a pretty long period of time. Minimum, I would say, of 3 months, and generally longer than that.
Call, is that cholestyramine?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's fascinating. I have a little handout that I give people about mycotoxins, and I've realized I've just recently added a paragraph or two in the beginning explaining what mycotoxins are, because, the mold, you inhale the mold when you walk into the moldy bar, and it finds residence in some part of your body, your respiratory tract, your gastrointestinal tract, and it decides to reproduce. And when it sends out spores, the spores, in anticipation of a healthy immune system attack on them, the mold spores are coated with toxins. And that's what we test for, is the presence of the toxins on the outside of spores that come from reproducing mold. And we hope when we treat the patient, just treating their mold's reproductive process will starve the mold itself, and they'll be cured from that, even though it's a lengthy and sometimes repeated treatment. The part of the treatment that is more variable, and I don't like doing as much because I think it's toxic itself, is using antifungals to treat what we presume is persistent mold colonies in the patient. How often do you do that, Anne? Do you use itraconazole or?
Rarely.
Yeah.
Very rare.
What are the tests that you use for urine mycotoxins? Like, what brands?
The company we use, Real-Time Mycotoxins, is great because it's covered by Medicare. They just collect a first morning's urine specimen. I ask people to overheat the day before, some way, sitting in a hot car, exercising, sauna, hot tub, something like that. And they test them for the presence of 5 different mycotoxins. And what's wonderful is they've been very consistent. They've been in practice for a long time. So I have patients I've been seeing for 5 years, and I'll test them, and I'll say, wow, the last year, all your mycotoxins have been nothing, and now they're back up again. What was your re-exposure? But they track in each report a history of them, and they talk about the classically expected symptoms from them. And I think some of the toxins, Dawn, that relate to cancer risk too. I think ochratoxin and aflatoxin, which we think of as much coming from food as from water-damaged buildings, but those pertain to cancer risk too, don't they?
Especially aflatoxin, yes. Yes, it's one of the major causes of cancer around the world.
What kind of cancers?
Oh, like liver cancers is the one that's usually brought up. And so people who have access only to moldy grains or peanuts, things like that. There's a lot of aflatoxin in African grains, for instance, and any grains that are a little bit off or wet. In the United States, grains are typically supposed to be tested for that before they're distributed. But, I can imagine that if that process fails for one reason or another, that there could be considerable exposure. I think peanuts are considered a major source in the United States. Although I don't have my finger on the statistics as to how much of our peanut supply is contaminated and makes it past inspection with that contamination. But yes, worldwide, aflatoxin is a large problem. And I suspect, though, aflatoxin is one we know about. I suspect there could be others. Corn is particularly prone to mold. And, one of the things that I've noticed is if you go to the grocery store and smell a lot of the ears of corn, they smell really moldy before you even bring them home from the grocery store.
Oh, dear.
And
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Give that a whiff, go through the make sure nobody's looking at you, but
Smell
go through
it
the
before
corn
you...
at the co-op, you'll see me there. Sniffing my way through the corn, but I rarely buy any because it usually smells moldy to me. So I think corn is well known for being easy for mold to attach to and pass on to us.
I caution people, I've sort of broken a few people's hearts saying I think they should stop buying their grains if they're going to still be eating any of them at all, or their nuts, out of the bulk section.
Oh, that happened to me. Now, don't tell Dr. Gordon, but I bought some rice a couple of weeks ago. And it was from a bulk bin. And I heard Dr. Gordon's voice going through my head. Like, you shouldn't buy things from bulk bins because they're probably moldy. And I thought, pshaw, I'm buying some rice. I really want some. Mine was in bulk. I got it home. I cooked it, and it was so moldy. It was awful. And I thought,
Really?
Yeah.
So it smelled moldy?
It tasted and smelled moldy once it was cooked, not when it was dry. And so it was really interesting. And I heard your voice going through my mind. Like, I told you. In a good way.
Lundberg packages 1 pound organic rice, and it's not near the bulk section, so we have to walk around the store to find it. But yeah, I still eat rice, Dawn, maybe a few times a month. I think we're going to have rice tonight, but I'm not. But it's the bulk that I do my best to avoid. But some things you have to get in bulk, and then you evidently have a very good nose, Dawn.
I do. That's kind of a curse. Yeah. I can smell somebody smoking a cigarette in the car ahead of me on the freeway. Seriously. I can smell people's deodorant from across the street. I thought everybody could.
Wow.
I thought everybody could. I just thought, well, yeah, I can smell. Doesn't everybody? And it turns out that's not the case. I didn't know that. But I just learned that recently, like 10 years ago, from my spouse who said, you can smell anything. I don't smell any of this stuff. And I said, really? Yeah. So yeah, I do have a good nose, but my spouse didn't like this rice either. So it wasn't just me. It was, we both took a bite and said, "Ew, is something wrong with this?" And it was. So
well, we could go on to mold forever, but I am really interested in picking our hormone expert's brain because, without going back to going over the results. Hormones were something I've learned recently is that prior to the WHI results being released a little bit over 20 years ago, almost 2002, I was in Montana when we got the news, listening to NPR. Almost 50% of women were on hormones, on hormone replacement, and wasn't the kind that we would recommend today. But approximately 50% of women. And today, and then for 20 years, only outliers like you and I and 7 other people in the United States. Okay, that's an exaggeration. We're prescribing hormones. So the vast majority of women were without hormone treatment. And in the last couple of years, it's definitely coming back, but we're still way less than 10% of women.
Now you're talking about postmenopausal women?
Thank you.
Okay.
And, that's a very interesting term because it's one of my pet peeves. We need a different nomenclature because there's premenopausal, which covers a lot of different areas of a woman's life, menopausal, which is the transition, and that as an older woman, I am in the postmenopausal period, but people don't think of that as an era entitled to its own respect. They say, you went through menopause 25 years ago. Why are you still taking hormones? Haven't your hot flashes stopped by now? And, of course, my jaw drops and my eyes widen in disbelief. But the rest of our whole life, our life after menopause is still a hormone absent era, and it's only beginning to change very slowly. And what do you think about, how do you see the field of hormone replacement therapy? How is it evolving in good ways, bad ways? Who should not be on hormones? What's your
I
thinking?
recently had a patient come to me who's been with me for many years on hormone replacement, very happily so, doing very well. And she's 71, and she said she went to her GYN at UCSF, and that GYN told her, you really need to go off these hormones. You're too old now. This is someone doing very well on their hormones, no problems at all, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is this based on, that you need to go off your hormones, right? It's based on the WHI study, which is not the hormones that we are using. There is no study with estradiol, transdermal. I just want to say the hormones that we should be using are only transdermal estradiol.
Not
There's
pills.
many options. There's
Not
many
pills.
options for
Not
that.
pills, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Transdermal, topical, you put it on the skin. There's patches, there's gels, there's creams from compounding pharmacies. That is the estrogen that we know is optimal, right? There's many studies that show this, but they're all small studies. So they get absolutely no respect from the overall gynecological community for many years. It is starting to change. The 2017 Menopause Society summary of hormone replacement said that for women who were doing well on hormone replacement, the data supports continuation, not discontinuation, as long as you were using transdermal topical estradiol, right? So that's one piece of it, that in those huge studies, the WHI studies that reported out, they were using an oral estrogen and a non-human estrogen. They were using horse-derived oral estrogen, and that has some problems. That oral estrogen increases the risk of vascular problems because it increases a molecule called CRP, which is vascular inflammation, and it increases fibrinogen. That's because when you take anything orally, part of it passes through the liver. When oral estrogen passes through the liver, it increases CRP, inflammation in the vessels, and fibrinogen. So what do you think happens when you give older women something that increases vascular inflammation and clotting? They have vascular problems. In fact, that was the most significant finding if you look at the details of the WHI study. As far as cardiovascular problems, it was almost all DVTs, strokes, blood clots. Those were the problems that they saw in the cardiovascular area. And of course, so yes, there were some increase in heart attacks, not a lot even. Anyway, when you use topical estradiol, and there's many, there's at least 10 studies that show oral estrogen increases clotting and vascular risk. Transdermal estradiol does not. The reason for the black box warning that we would like to fight with the FDA about on all estradiol patches, estrogel, Divigel, all the gels that are commercially available have this black box warning, which is absolutely ridiculous, right?
It's untrue. It's absolutely
untrue, right? They have no problem giving birth control pills, which is a form of estradiol, to, any woman under 40, right? And a synthetic progestin with it. No problem with that. But if you're older, you are not allowed to have estrogen. And the problem with taking a woman off estrogen and progesterone when she's 65 or 70 or 75 is that she is then going to lose her bone benefits, right? Because estradiol is tremendously protective against osteoporosis. They lose their vascular protection because estrogen actually increases vascular health, cardiovascular health, topical estradiol. And not to mention our main focus of the studies Deborah and I worked on, cognitive benefits, right? The brain is full of estradiol receptors, not premerin receptors, not estrone receptors, estradiol receptors.
Let me ask you, because what it's really full of in your brain is two types of estrogen receptors. And I wonder, for people who are particularly phobic about estradiol, and maybe a breast cancer patient, and, I believe the estrogen receptors for the brain are equally, if not more, receptive. So there's three types of estrogen in the body. Estrone is the most background type of estrogen, and it's really the only one that older women tend to make at all. Estradiol, which is our primary estrogen through our reproductive years, and estriol, which is our primary estrogen through pregnancy, I believe. But estriol also binds very well, I'm not sure about bone, but I think to brain receptors, brain estrogen receptors. Have you used estriol at all, Anne?
When I make up I use compounding pharmacies, at least for half of my patients. I really adapt my treatment to the patient's preferences as long as it works well for them. So probably about half of my patients are on a compounded product of estradiol and estriol. Yeah. But I do not have confidence that estriol is going to do the cognitive benefit work that we want from estradiol.
And
I think estradiol is the important molecule. Estriol, there's research showing that estriol has some immune benefits. It's certainly very good for skin health. I have a lot of patients who use a low dose of estriol on their face, and they feel very strongly that it's a benefit there. And also, as far as vaginal health, I think estriol makes a big difference there. I often use a combination of DHEA and estriol.
I learned that from you and my patients. Thank you for that.
Yeah, it's very helpful. I also use a low dose of testosterone in the genital area and the vaginal area for libido, for just the overall health of that area of the body. It can do with a little bit of just a very low dose of testosterone, often, well under a milligram, 0.2 every other day is often a
dosage.
A dose I would use there. Yeah. For example, just to cover kind of a lot of stuff there in one answer.
Mm-hmm. And the other area that we are all three interested in by professional and, in my case, personal history is the intersection of estrogen and breast cancer. And since I didn't forward you some very interesting information that Dawn has graciously allowed me to be included in the process of, Dawn, why don't you tell us a little bit about using prescriptive estrogen intentionally with your breast cancer patients?
Well, thank you for the gracious part, but I think I really dragged you into that. I think you're thinking of the patient that we shared together, and I dragged you into because I wanted you to actually do the hormone prescribing because that's not something I do a lot of, but I do some, and I've learned a lot from you. But Deborah and I share a patient that I will disguise her identification aspects a little bit to protect her privacy, but she lives in Nevada and is in her 60s and has a history of metastatic breast cancer, and that was what I was seeing her for. It's just metastatic to the bones, but we decided that the anti-breast cancer drug that she was on, which is a very powerful anti-hormone, an aromatase inhibitor, was, putting her at risk for osteoporotic fractures and brain health issues. And Also, there's a really interesting field that I'm working on right now with some colleagues at Moffitt Cancer Center in Florida. We're working on mathematical modeling of tumor dynamics and pulsed therapies in order to delay the onset of treatment resistance, which is otherwise completely inevitable with the way we use cancer drugs now. It doesn't matter the drug. It doesn't matter if it's an anti-hormone or chemotherapy or anything.
Or any cancer.
Or any cancer. So this patient, we thought, well, if we keep her on her anti-hormone treatment, it will kill off all the breast cancer cells that are sensitive to it, and then the ones that remain will be the ones that are insensitive to our treatment, and then she'll be up a creek. So we took her off the hormones, the anti-hormone cancer therapy, and Deborah, with my blessing, put her on hormone replacement therapy.
With the patient's enthusiasm.
And now we're pulsing the hormones and the anti-hormones, doing our best to make mathematical modeling of this process so that we know when to start and when to stop each treatment, with the goal of doing what's called directed evolution, which means that we will control the adaptation of that tumor's various subpopulations so that we can control its treatment and maintain treatment sensitivity. It's a way to keep the patient going and healthy. We don't cure the cancer. We don't even try. We just try to keep it
at bay.
Under control. Mm-hmm. Yes, we let it grow back, and then we shrink it a little bit, and then we let it grow back, and then we shrink it. And when we let it grow back, we actually encourage the growth of hormone-sensitive breast cancer cells by giving hormone replacement therapy. We want the hormone-sensitive breast cancer cells. We don't like the hormone-insensitive ones.
So you're tipping the balance of cancer cells toward hormone-sensitive with your treatment.
Exactly.
Amazing. And the anti-hormone you're using is still aromatase?
It's an aromatase inhibitor, yes.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Okay.
And we have actually, Deborah and I share a prostate cancer patient with whom we're doing that exact thing. We're using testosterone to maintain his treatment sensitivity of the cancer in between hormonal blockade episodes using mathematical modeling.
And you've been working with him on this approach for quite a while, is that right?
Yes, we're coming out with a paper on his case. It's we believe that we are the first to ever restore castration sensitivity to castration-resistant prostate cancer.
What does that mean, castration sensitivity?
So prostate cancer, when it's first diagnosed, is always sensitive to removal of male hormone, all right, or almost always. And that process is called castration. And in the old days, they literally used to do surgical castration, removal of the testes.
I remember that when I was a resident. I remember people getting that, yeah.
So now we have drugs that can do that, thank goodness. But again, after a year, maybe a year and a half, everybody becomes resistant to those treatments. Their cancer does. And that had happened with this patient. We restored the sensitivity by rescuing, with male hormone, testosterone, by rescuing the few remaining testosterone-sensitive cancer cells that he had in his body. And that was a first, I think. So we'll be publishing that paper hopefully soon. And I think that will be really interesting, I hope, to the medical world, that we can direct the evolution of cancers with judicious and skillful use of intermittent hormone replacement.
And for his case particularly, it works so easily because the PSA is a readily available tumor marker, but you're using something different for our mutual woman patient, right? A different kind of marker.
We're using circulating tumor DNA, or we're trying to. So we'll see how that goes and let you know. But so far, she's doing fantastically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And but this is also an approach you could use with really any tumor that has kind of readily with any, because this is true about all cancers, right? That as you were just saying, as you treat them, you kill the ones that are sensitive to the treatment, and you have the treatment-resistant cells thrive. So it would be great with lung cancer or colon cancer if you could not be so aggressive with your treatment and let it ride for a while until a tumor marker comes back up. How many cancers have readily available tumor markers similar to the PSA in prostate cancer?
Almost none. Certain breast cancers will make protein tumor markers, a few gastrointestinal tumors and a few gynecologic tumors, but a lot of them don't. So those are in the minority. Now, though, we have circulating tumor DNA, which will allow the detection of small amounts of cancer activity in many, many cancers. So, and they're not restricted to the type of cancer. So that will be, I think that is helping our work already and will only get better in the next couple of years.
Amazing, amazing work. I've had several patients come to me over the years for cognitive decline while on aromatase, right? Because aromatase takes your estradiol close to zero. Yeah. But this kind, and of course, they were being treated for cancer, of course, breast cancer. And we switched them, sent them to a different oncologist, switched them to tamoxifen, and their cognition improved, right? But you can't always do that, right?
Yeah, tamoxifen is a very good drug. It's not as powerful against cancer as the aromatase inhibitors in most, in large populations. Certainly different individuals may have a different, their mileage may vary, but
Right.
And if you give tamoxifen in terms of oncologic outcome, if you give that constantly, you're going to run into the same issue of resistance. So that needs to be addressed as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's really interesting about tamoxifen versus aromatase inhibitors. The aromatase inhibitors are, very difficult for a lot of patients. So it's really nice if you can have a break from them and even have some hormone therapy in between. The patients like it. Yeah.
I mean, but would you treat any breast cancer patient with that HRT aromatase combination? Because
Oh no! So only if they have a
some
particular.
people are instead curable.
Yes,
right?
you would never do that with someone who these patients all have metastatic disease.
Yes,
That's considered incurable. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know you've seen a couple of my patients, Dawn, in consultation, and just taking off the charts. So there was a woman I interact with on social media. She's the only, don't really know her, obviously, but I made some disparaging remark about DCIS, or I was talking in a pro way about hormone replacement therapy, and she said, unfortunately, I can't do that because I had DCIS 20 years ago. And I said, well, DCIS isn't even really considered cancer anymore. And she got really mad at me until I introduced her to your colleague, Dawn, at UC San Francisco, who's trying to rename DCIS so it doesn't even have cancer.
Dr. Esserman, Laura Esserman, has spent her career trying to de-escalate the treatment of breast cancer. And she's a surgeon. And I think, and I went back and looked at what the new name might be. I think we did that on our podcast a few weeks ago, and I couldn't find it. So I still don't know what the new name is.
Oh, I think we did find it, but I'm going to look for it again. It's not as user-friendly as DCIS, but I did encourage her, certainly, I think on my own, one of my patients in the study was someone who I tried to put on hormones for years, and then she came back when the study started, and by then it'd been so long, I even knew I was going to put her, because I think it'd been 10 years since her DCIS. And I said, okay, it's not only been that it wasn't cancer to begin with, but it's been a decade. We're going to treat you. But you and I share another patient who was hormones greatly improved her sleep and helped her osteoporosis. And we monitored her, and I put her back on hormones, and we monitored her with MRIs for the first year or so. And she's now, I think, like 3 or 4 years out with no recurrence and happily traveling the world, and her brain and her bones and her sleep are all fine, and she's back on hormones. And I wish I knew a good tumor marker blood test to do for her, but we'll just keep imaging monitoring her.
Well, she could try the circulating tumor DNA if she has a tumor specimen somewhere in a lab. They keep them for 10 years.
Well, you saw her, so I might ask you again about her look and see if you have a tumor specimen.
I don't know why I didn't do that. Yeah.
Well, we'll arrange for that all to be done. But and then when it comes to aromatase inhibitors that do take their estrogen down to zero, what we learned and also talked about in a whole devoted podcast is particularly the aromatase inhibitor, correct my pronunciation, I call it exemestane or exemestane, something like that.
I don't know the correct pronunciation, so I'll take either one.
But that is one where when paired with genistein, they have a cooperative effect. It's more effective against cancer. And of course, they get the genistein benefit of activating estrogen receptors, not throughout the whole body, not in the breasts and in the uterus, but in the brain and the bones.
You brought that to my attention. I was not aware of that until you taught me that. And it's really, really interesting. And there's another one that has the opposite effect. I think it's letrozole.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. So you don't want to give letrozole and genistein together, but you do want to give exemestane and genistein together. And really interesting. I think that's really esoteric, not widely known.
I need that paper.
Okay.
I need that.
Deborah will give it to you.
I get the questions in our other podcasts that are supposed to be for you about genistein. I'm like, oh, darn it.
Oh, that's the other thing Ann and I share is that Dr. Bredesen has a monthly podcast for cognitive protocol practitioners and patients. And she very graciously shared that with me recently. So she does half of them and I do half of them. And did I tell you I'm doing one a few days after we get back from Montana? So I'm going to do my best not to.
You have to work on that while we're there. And I will need to catch up with Stacy, my office manager, because we're always getting questions and problems coming in. They don't stop because you go on vacation.
I have 2 new colleagues in my office, 2 doctors, one of whom has taken the Bredesen training and one of whom is way more engrossed in full comprehensive primary care from a functional medicine point of view. And we had a meeting yesterday and I said, someday I'd like to get to the point where we can share a call for each other. And they both said, how about bucking up, Deborah? And when you leave town next week, let us take call for you. And I had a panic attack. What?
Yeah.
Release control of my patients. I'm going to build up my courage and find a way to do it safely. So I'm not as much online while we're in Montana as I might be otherwise.
I wanted to mention something. My BRCA1 patient, who followed for 25 years. Her mother and her sister both had breast cancer, so they all got tested. My patient was BRCA positive too, like her mother and her sister, but she has decided, I don't push her either way, she's decided to stay on estrogen replacement. I keep her a little lower, her level, than I do other people, maybe more like 50 than, 80 to 100.
I would like to interject here and say, women, all women listening, if your doctor puts you on estrogen but then never checks your level, have a talk with them about that. Okay, go ahead.
Which is all GYNs. Okay,
yes,
let's just face it. Okay, they say, those tests are useless, right? And I would like to use the better test, the LCMS, but if you go through people's
so that's a more highly sensitive form of estradiol.
It's a highly sensitive test. There aren't as many things that interfere with it, but it's $140.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Anyway.
Anyway, so
your BRCA patient.
My BRCA patient she follows the protocol for BRCA, which is that she's monitored every 6 months. She gets either a mammogram or an MRI, and she's been fine for over 25 years now. So it's interesting. I don't know. What do you think about that, Dawn?
Well, BRCA1 mutations tend to skew toward triple-negative breast cancers rather than the hormone-sensitive ones. So I wonder if there's some kind of interaction there. I don't know. We will often use some preventive therapy with tamoxifen in those patients. And there does seem to be, I believe the studies show that does seem to decrease the risk. Tamoxifen is interesting in that when it's given to decrease risk of breast cancer, it doesn't really decrease your overall lifetime risk. It just moves the diagnosis date back by however many years you're on tamoxifen. So if you take tamoxifen for 5 years and you were destined to get breast cancer at 45, then you might get it at 50 instead or something like that.
I wonder how they know those things. Is there a book somewhere that says what age I'm going to get breast cancer? I'd like to check that book.
These are large groups, okay? So statistically, we can see, yes, you can see the curve move in the entire cohort over to a higher age.
So they don't stay on tamoxifen forever?
They probably don't want to. And they usually, BRCA1 mutation carriers are usually, told to get through their period of childbearing and then have some type of surgery, often double mastectomy, removal of the ovaries, removal of the organs that might be at risk for developing cancer. And there's different penetrations in different families. So you might have a BRCA1 mutation running through one particular family, and maybe 10, 15% of the women in that family will get breast cancer, whereas there might be another family where, it's like 85 or 90%. So
it's never just one gene, just like it's not one thing that causes Alzheimer's disease.
Well, the BRCA1 gene is long, and so there are different places that it can be broken too. So there are lots of nuances to this. But to go back to Anne's question, what do I think about that? I think we absolutely have no idea. And I think, the way we've dealt with cancer in the past is just wait and see if you get cancer. Now we have early warning tests that I think are going to be really change the way we deal with cancer. So pan-cancer screening tests, which are blood tests looking for, at this point, 50 different types of cancer and can pinpoint based on a positive blood test which organ is likely giving rise to this cancer signal. Those are going to be so important in the next few years. And then if you already have cancer, circulating tumor DNA, matched to that cancer specimen that we have in the lab somewhere, those things are becoming rapidly treatment changing and practice changing. We can now use those to declare a recurrence rather than waiting for, 6, 8, 12, or even 18 months longer for imaging to become positive before we can say that, this patient's cancer has reactivated. So those kinds of things are really going to be a big changer.
My patient had a bilateral oophorectomy, but elected to keep her breasts.
Mm-hmm.
And that reminded me that I was stunned this year to learn that ovarian cancer does not start in the ovaries, but starts in the fallopian tubes.
That's
and
correct.
So if you are concerned about preventing ovarian cancer, you have your fallopian tubes removed and you can leave your ovaries.
I didn't know that. Wow, you can keep your ovaries.
Now, how long have you known that, Dawn? I mean, is that like...
Maybe a couple of years, not long. So, yeah.
It's newer information. You didn't know that, Deborah?
No, because and maybe that came up in our colleagues' discussion this year about, and we have an older friend in common, a physician who was perhaps facing her ovary removal, and we all said, once you're well past menopause, your ovaries really are not serving you. We don't really need them anymore. But a 40-year-old woman who's at risk for ovarian cancer and doesn't want any more children, wow, great birth control. Remove the fallopian tubes, keep your ovaries.
I know. It's amazing.
I had a thought about your BRCA patient from what you just said, Dawn. So I didn't know this, that BRCA1 genetics predispose you to getting the worst kind of cancer, breast cancer, which is triple negative cancer.
Well, they can get any kind of breast cancer, but it really skews toward triple negative. That's a risk factor for triple negative breast cancer. Yeah.
So I wonder if giving her estradiol, which is an interesting, it's estradiol's relationship with breast cancer. We've talked about this a little bit, Dawn, even on the podcast and separately. It actually reduces your risk of breast cancer unless you have one, which makes it grow. And if you don't have one, it tends to give you a friendlier, more easily treatable kind of breast cancer does want to rise in the setting of hormone replacement therapy. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, you are. So women
way?
who are on hormone therapy when they're diagnosed with breast cancer, so that's assuming or extrapolating that this breast cancer maybe wasn't there when they started their hormones or whatever, or maybe it was and the hormones changed it. They tend to have a better prognosis stage for stage than women who are not on hormone replacement therapy when they're diagnosed with breast cancer. We don't understand that. There's so much that we don't understand. So, I think this, as I'm sitting here listening to this conversation, it just makes me more and more upset that we rely on these large data sets to advise our patients, we have to move toward using the patient's data set alone, with informed by, of course, what has happened to other people. But we have to, I guess we have to rely on the patient's data set much more. We have to grow that part of the medical brain so that we are treating our patients truly as individuals.
Especially true because, when you ask, say, Joanne Mason, who is the lead author of the WHI, most of the WHI reports, her name is first, asked her, will there be another study using the right hormones that we now use, transdermal estradiol and real progesterone? She goes, probably not. It's too expensive.
So
there you go, right?
The big work's not going to be done. You have to look at the individual patients.
It's the individual doctors who will be doing this work. So Joanna Mason is an epidemiologist. What does she study? Her field is large groups of people, the health of large groups of people. It's a subset of public health. I have a degree in epidemiology, and that's what it is. And I have a master's in public health, and we look at, in epidemiology, large groups of people. Now that I'm a doctor, I look at very small non-groups of people, just the one patient in front of me, and it's very different. And so we haven't developed the science of how do you look at and treat one patient. So that's one of my goals. It's a little too lofty for me to carry out, but it's how do we get the conversation back to the patient in front of us, and how do we develop rigorous data so that we can treat that patient? And I'm not talking about data from the next patient in the next exam room. How does that patient's blood work and circulating tumor DNA and genetics, how does that, and diet and microbiome and mold exposure, and hormone replacement, how do all those things interact for that patient, and what are our goals for that particular patient, and how do we know that we're driving toward that goal? It's by looking at that patient in a rigorous way, which you folks are doing. And that's what I really, really, I think I went to that first meeting with the Bredesen at Buck Institute, and I'm not a dementia specialist or practitioner at all. I went because the ideas were so new and spectacular, and the way of conglomerating lots of different inputs, I think carries over into every field of medicine, including oncology, which is where I practice. And so I learned a lot, and I still think about that meeting every week. That meeting crosses my mind. Like, I remember the roof. Remember the leaky roof metaphor?
Yes. Yeah. The 36 holes in the roof.
There were 29. Yeah.
I think there's 150 now.
Yeah. We're up to many, many, many more. It's fantastic to hear you talk about oncology in this functional medicine way. There's the broad understanding and concepts, and then there's the individual patient. That's so fantastic that's, my brother's multiple myeloma, he's 11 years out from his diagnosis with no recurrence. And his doctor treated him with Keytruda, which is after he failed 10 other treatments, which is not a treatment that's known for multiple myeloma, but it absolutely cured my brother. And
that's what he cares about. He doesn't care about those, 20 large randomized controlled trials that said Keytruda doesn't work, on average.
For this cancer, right?
Yeah.
So, Dawn, I assume you had this orientation or you wouldn't have done the project, but you had a patient quite a while ago, because the book's been around for a while, who was approaching his CLL, I believe, chronic lymphocytic leukemia.
Oh, I wrote a book on a patient. He was not my patient. I didn't treat him. In fact, actually, no doctors treated him. He was followed at Harvard and Johns Hopkins for CLL, and he kept refusing all of their recommended treatments, which were, as they honestly told him, they're not cures. They might, help your symptoms. They might not even prolong your life, although you might feel a little bit better as you die. So he said, no, thank you. And he spent 20 years trying to figure out what he might do. And he eventually reversed his chronic lymphocytic leukemia. It's the only case in the medical history. I wrote a case study on him. And I also wrote a popular book with him. He told me a story, and I wrote it down and tried to make it interesting. But yes,
the book is titled N of One for anyone who wants it. It's a good read.
Oh, N of One.
N of One. And so that's, that is something that I've always been interested in. And his wasn't a formal N of One where he sat down and tracked out the statistics he was looking for ahead of time and those kinds of things. Of course not. And
But it worked.
You can't argue with success. I don't care if you have 1,000 randomized controlled trials, which we may in CLL. We have a lot, I'm sure. If they don't work, they're not, there's no cure from any of them, not one. Then I think, we ought to look elsewhere. That's the wrong design venue for oncology and maybe many other chronic diseases like Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm. And equally strong N of 1 is to reinforce the possibility of cure on an individual basis. N of 1 going in the opposite direction. So you can use N of 1 for good or for ill, depending on your viewpoint. And you have to read it and with the patient in front of you decide, I don't care what I read in the New York Times article. I talked to somebody else who said this protocol works, so I'm going to try it.
It's sort of like I tell patients who want to do that, it's like, my friend won the lottery, so I'm going to go buy the ticket I'm going to go use the tickets the numbers that he used when I buy my ticket. It's like, yeah, okay, well, good luck. Talk about some of the successful stories from your studies. That would be really interesting, I think, to our audience to hear. What are some things that you noticed and that really got your interest? That's just fascinating. It's remarkable.
There's so many people who got their lives back. I had a gentleman in this study who
in
this reversal of cognitive decline study, we call it RECODE. That's the short little name that we've given it, RECODE, for reversal of cognitive decline. Someone who never finished high school, but was obviously pretty intelligent and had scores. I mean, his CNS vital sign scores were, I think, overall score was 1 percentile, comprehensive memory was 10 percentile, and executive function was like 7 percentile, comparing him to men of his age, right? This guy was so enthusiastic about the protocol. Oh my goodness. What a wonderful, wonderful human being. And he, at the time, was not exercising at all, thin, underweight person, but just so excited to do the protocol. And he did everything absolutely above and beyond what we asked him to do, as far as doing the brain training, taking every single supplement every day, documenting everything he was doing for us. We document a lot so we know what they're doing. For example, if they're doing Brain HQ, we have that data coming into our data collecting system. This is something different from the first study, Deborah. We have their Brain HQ data. We have their sleep data on the Oura Ring. I mean, all their sleep data. REM, how much REM sleep, how much deep sleep, heart rate variability, etc. So he started exercising. He started riding his bike up Mount Tam twice a week, 3-hour rides from nothing, right? Just amazing. Just so curious about everything, so engaged. Well, this guy's final scores were his comprehensive overall score was in the high 70s. I don't remember exactly, but also his memory score and his
from everything in the single digits to in the upper quartile.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is again is your study frame period 9 months?
Yes.
For the same. So that's the same.
In 9 months. In 9 months, he made those changes. Yeah. And I have to say, he did over and above. We asked him to do, at least 36 levels per week of brain training. He did 45 or 55,
Enthusiasts will often do better, and that's great. And, he was born with that lucky star over his head, and I'm sure he had some unlucky stars when it comes to his genetics. That sounds like a kind of an ApoE4 story where they might be slow to get started and miss some keystones along the way, but they're basically usually pretty intelligent people, and then they fall off the cliff sometime late in life, women earlier than men if they don't have hormones. So, he was lucky to be an enthusiast, and that will hold him in good stead for the rest of his cognitive and body life.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's a great story. Yeah. Well, this has been great. Is there anything else either one of the two of you want to add in?
No, I mean, I feel like we three could talk all day, couldn't we? But wow, so fun to be with you guys. And
Yeah, well, it's great to have you here, and I look forward to the upcoming weekend. And Dawn, I'll see you soon. And Dawn and I we have built offices in the same building now. She's my office neighbor.
oh, how fun.
Yeah, so I look forward to seeing both of you, and thanks for your time today.
Yeah, thank you both. And thank you, especially Dawn. I learned so much from listening to you.
Oh, my pleasure, and vice versa. Right back at you. Yeah.
All right, good talking to you. See you next time.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You have been listening to the Lemanne Gordon podcast, where docs talk shop.
For podcast transcripts, episode notes and links, and more, please visit the podcast website at
docstalkshop.com.
Happy eavesdropping.
Everything presented in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and should not be construed as medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is established or implied. If you have a health or a medical concern, see a qualified professional promptly.
We make no warranty as to the accuracy, adequacy, validity, reliability, or completeness of the information presented in this podcast or found on the podcast website.
We accept no liability for loss or damage of any kind resulting from your use of the podcast or the information presented therein. Your use of any information presented in this podcast is at your own risk.
Again, if you have any medical concerns, see your own provider or another qualified health professional promptly.
You must not take any action based on information in this podcast without first consulting your own qualified medical professional. Everything on this podcast, including music, dialogue, and ideas, is copyrighted by Docs Talk Shop.
Docs Talk Shop is recorded at Freeman Sound Studio in Ashland, Oregon.